Sir Malcolm Rifkind is the former British Foreign Secretary and joins me now live from London. Sir, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
When we think about how Rex Tillerson is faring so far, we perhaps need to think about the hurdles that he's faced so far as well. Now, the backdrop, of course, to these meetings in Moscow was the G7. And at the G7, the UK attempted to force the members to impose sanctions on Russia, and the UK failed at that. How much of a hurdle do you think that was for Rex Tillerson then going into these Moscow negotiations?
Well, I don't think it was quite like that. I think Boris Johnson and Rex Tillerson had discussed this beforehand, and this was a position that Boris Johnson put forward, which Rex Tillerson was supporting at that time. As you rightly say, it did not get the level of agreement that enabled them to go ahead. But can I make a more general point? I've been unimpressed by the way the White House has been dealing with this over the last few days. The one thing that Putin understands is power, not empty rhetoric. When they had the airstrikes last week, they worked. All compliments to President Trump on the airstrikes, because as a result of these airstrikes, we can assume with 100% certainty that Assad will not use chemical weapons again in the foreseeable future. However, what's happened since then has not been an expression of power, but of weakness, because we've had constant suggestions, not just by Rex Tillerson, by others as well, that Assad must go, that he cannot be part of even a transitional arrangement. Now, as your other commentators have said, that's been a completely untenable position. And if Tillerson, in meeting President Putin and Sergei Lavrov, has come away from that, I'm not surprised. He should never have been there in the first place. The Russians would not have been impressed. And therefore, it's good that we might now be getting back to the real discussion, which is how we can, hopefully with Russian support, persuade all the Syrian factions, Assad on the one side and the opposition on the other, to get round that table and bring this ghastly conflict gradually to an end.
You've had a huge amount of experience over the years with dealing with Russia. What would be your advice then? Should the US and Rex Tillerson be looking for compromise, areas of compromise, or do you go in with a position of strength and say, come on board with us, or we'll go it alone?
Diplomacy of this kind only works when you've got leverage. Now, there is leverage that has emerged thanks to the decision taken by the White House a week ago. What Putin has been doing over the last 2 years, he is, from his perspective, helping Assad in a military way. There was no real cost to pay. He couldn't care less about global condemnation. He was helping ensure that Assad gradually recovered large amounts of lost territory, and Assad today is much stronger than he was 2 years ago. Now, Putin does not want, any more than the Americans want, a military confrontation between Russia and the United States. And up till last week, that was not a possibility. Putin now has to factor into his deliberations the fact that America now is in Syria in a military way, in a way they were not a week ago.
Okay.
So Putin now doesn't have that freedom of action. That enables us, if we're realistic about it, to try and actually get some progress by working together.
One thing that the G7 did agree on last week was that they didn't want to push Putin too far. They didn't want to put him in a corner. Are we at the point now where Putin has to be pushed into a corner if there's going to be any movement on the ground?
Well, the debate last week in the G7 was actually really rather foolish because it was about symbolic sanctions. It wasn't about any real pushing Putin into a corner. It was about whether some unnamed Syrian and perhaps Russian military people should be subject to personal sanctions. The idea that the Kremlin would change its whole strategy, even if that had been approved by the G7, was never remotely on the cards. And therefore, I don't think that should ever have even been initiated.
Diplomatic efforts elsewhere, of course, with the United Nations. We are expecting, we believe, a vote any time now on this draft resolution for further pressure on Syria.
But we already know what the result of that will be.
We do, but
we know what the result will be.
As a result, then, do you think the UN has got any bite left?
Well, you can't blame the United Nations if an individual country, as we've been hearing earlier this evening, 8 times vetoes any meaningful resolution on Syria. So the Security Council can function when there is agreement. Occasionally there is agreement, and that makes a huge difference. When there isn't agreement because of Russian vetoes, then you have to try to pursue the objective in an alternative way. And the way to what I hope Mr. Tillerson is saying to Lavrov and Putin, and one day Trump will say to Putin, is, look, we're both now militarily involved in Syria. We both want this war to come to an end. We therefore have to accept that all the current participants, including Assad,
Sir, I'm going to have to interrupt
must be part of that negotiation.
My apologies. Sir Malcolm Rifkind, thank you very much for your thoughts, but I'm going to have to take our viewers straight to the United Nations now. We are, I believe, now going to be looking at live pictures here of the Security Council. They are about to vote on a draft resolution that demands Syria cooperate with an investigation into that suspected chemical attack in Idlib. Let's have a listen in.